What's going on, guys? Vulkan here. So when I first dove into Last Epoch, geez, probably about 3 years ago, it was a very different game. Truly a shell of what it is today. But one of the things that's always been mentioned and floating around was the notion that legendary items were going to be added to the game. Now, if anyone knows me, they know I love loot, and I'm just an absolute sucker for a good reward system. So naturally, legendaries were something that I was super interested in, but they've been pretty mum when it comes to what a legendary item is. However, today we are finally talking about legendary items in Last Epoch. I'm very excited. We're going to cover what they are, how to get them, and my first impressions of the legendary system coming to the game. So to pile on to kind of the crafting changes coming to Last Epoch, which I'm going to do another video on, they're changing up how unique items and exalted items interact with each other. So for anyone out of the loop, unique items are these orange text items, and they have some sort of unique perk to build around, hence their name. Sometimes it's a strong stat, other times it completely changes the way your skills work, so it kind of varies. Some are better than others. I will just put that plainly out there. Some uniques are terrible, some uniques are really, really good. And then we have exalted items. So these are purple text items that have one attribute that is much, much higher than you usually see. So for instance, it could be an item that gives plus 300 poison damage instead of the regular plus 200%, for instance. So what do these changes have to do with legendary items? So a lot, because you're going to be combining these two things in order to forge a new legendary version of a unique item. So they're adding in this thing called a dungeon, right? This is going to be very different from what we've seen so far in Last Epoch. This is a brand new piece of content. It's going to have us work through a map and then a boss at the very end. Once you kill that boss, there will be a chest in there called an eternity cache. Again, this is a new thing. This is something they've referenced quite a bit in the past, but this is the first time we've actually seen it and heard about it in practice. So you're going to place a unique item that has, quote, legendary potential, and an exalted item with 4 affixes, exactly 4 affixes, not 3 affixes, not 2 affixes, 4 affixes. You're going to place this thing into the cache and then rerun the dungeon, and then you can gather your legendary from the cache. So at first this sounds really confusing, right? There's a lot of things. We have, what is an eternity cache? What is legendary potential? Like, what are we even talking about here? So think of it this way. The eternity cache is an oven, and the unique and the exalted item you put in there, that's your recipe. You leave and rerun the dungeon, and once you've defeated the boss again, your item is done cooking, and then you can pull it out of the oven and loot it. Then you can load up another set of items to start cooking a new legendary. So like I said, I've mentioned a lot of terms here, right? So we're going to go through those. Let's talk about what they mean. So first up is legendary potential. So certain uniques will have a new legendary potential tag. This determines whether or not an item can upgrade to a legendary. Now, to build on this, you're going to see a number next to the words legendary potential that will determine how effective this upgrade will be. Now, next, I mentioned an exalted item with 4 affixes. The reason you need exactly 4 is because your legendary item will take up to 4 affixes off of that item and add them onto the unique. This is where the legendary potential number comes into play. If you have a unique with legendary potential of 2, then it will take 2 random affixes from the exalted item and add them onto your unique. If you have a 4 legendary potential, then it will take all 4 and so on and so forth. So obviously you want 4. That's the best stat you can possibly have because it's going to pull all of the affixes off of that exalted item, destroy the exalted item, and then give you a unique or a legendary version of that unique. So all of this has been very probably confusing up to this point. So here are a couple images on what a legendary item will look like once it's all said and done. So here we have the Hammer of Laurent. Now the original Hammer of Laurent comes with the white text that you see here. Now the reddish text is from the legendary upgrade, which really shows off how this system will work. This compounds the effectiveness of what this hammer can do, and it pulls some really cool affixes off of whatever exalted item they had and threw them onto the Hammer of Laurent. So you can see exactly how powerful some of these weapons can become. And there are a couple other examples. Some you can see where only 1 or 2 affixes were added to the item. So there is a variation. So let's go ahead and recap. So what exactly is all coming to the game? So last Epoch is adding a new dungeon that introduces the legendary system and the eternity cache. Once you clear the dungeon, you'll have the opportunity to put a unique with legendary potential and an exalted item with 4 affixes into a chest. Then once you clear the dungeon again, you can loot your new item and then load up another one. So the devs did give us a few tips and a few kind of FAQ points when it comes to the legendary system. So the first, make sure to upgrade your affixes as much as possible on the exalted item. You want them as high as they possibly can go because you cannot increase affixes on legendary items. You can't craft on them. So once it's formed into a legendary, that is it. So you want to make sure you get those affixes as high as possible. Number 2, legendary potential is tied to higher level areas. So if you want uniques with 4 potential, then you need to grind out higher level content. You're not going to be able to go run through the story in the starter zone and get a unique with 4 legendary potential. And number 3, lastly, you cannot reroll a legendary. So you can't take a legendary you made and an exalted item and throw it back into the eternity cache and say, I want something different. Or I want different affixes. That just doesn't work. You have to have a unique and you have to have the exalted item. Legendaries will not work. Okay, so I want to talk about this system, right? We covered what exactly it is, how it works, all that fun stuff. But I want to talk about kind of my impressions. So on the surface, I really like what they're doing. They gave us a new dungeon. That's coming, which means new content, which is always good. And they're adding a new rarity of items and a new system to make old uniques more useful because, let's be honest, early level uniques just aren't viable in late game. You're going to have things like the Falcon, River Grasp gauntlets, or whatever they are, the ones with the throwing damage. You're going to have all of these, and they're not going to be as effective just because they don't scale as high. So being able to kind of build onto those is going to breathe a kind of nice breath of fresh air into those ones. But let's talk about some of the most obvious things we have here, right? I'm really bummed out that legendaries are just upgraded uniques and not entirely new items. And now I get they're going to continue to add uniques and those can be built on, they can be upgraded to legendaries, and it's really going to open up some build variety, some cool combinations, but that doesn't have the same kind of oomph or the same kind of like shock value that a brand new weapon or a brand new piece of gear has. There's just something cool about being able to add a brand new perk or something that truly makes that item legendary instead of just tacking on more stats and changing the text color. Because to me, that's really all we're doing here. We're taking additional stats and throwing them on there. And to me, stats are great. You know, they open up some cool build things, but at the same time, stats are stats and they're kind of boring. So being able to have those cool effects, things like that, I think are going to be more impactful. But honestly, the system's in place, it's developed, it's coming here in a few days. So this is what we're going to have. Now, I think what they could do in the future, right? They could add in something like a pattern or an engraving system, something that you can loot off of bosses that has an effect built into it. So imagine like a scroll, right? And it has a perk, written on it or whatever. Then you could substitute that scroll, engraving, pattern, however you want to describe it. You could substitute that for the exalted item. And then you could throw the unique or the exalted item, whichever one, into the oven, the eternity cache, and cook that thing up. And then it either replaces the unique effect or it adds a unique effect onto that exalted item to give you something truly different and something that you can truly build around. And I just think having that would give so much more control. You would have some possibilities for some really awesome effects tied to gear. And for me personally, that's a lot more interesting than just stats being tacked on to gear. But truly, that's my only complaint. I think everything else is great, right? They're adding a whole bunch of new stuff to bring people back into the game or give people that are still playing a lot more to explore. Now, I'm curious if you all think the same, right? Am I missing something big that is going to help create a larger power fantasy in the game that I'm just missing out on? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you next time.
Sound off, one and all, everybody. Don't take what you openly handed.